When Jesus had spoken these words, he went away with his disciples across the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas, who was betraying him, also knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having obtained the cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, came out and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. Now then, when he said to them, "I am," they drew back and fell to the ground. He then asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am. So if you are seeking me, let these go on their way, so that the word which he spoke would be fulfilled. Of those whom you have given me, I have lost not one." Then Simon Peter, since he had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, am I not to drink it?" So the cohort, the commander, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, and brought him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was in their best interest for one man to die in behalf of the people. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave woman, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in temple area, where all the Jews congregate, and I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Ask those who have heard what I spoke to them. Look, these people know what I said." But when he said this, one of the officers who was standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not one of his disciples as well, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Then they brought Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate came out to them and said, "What accusation are you bringing against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death, This happened so that the word of Jesus, which he said, indicating what kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Therefore Pilate entered the praetorium again, and summoned Jesus and said to him, "You are the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that it would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this purpose I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And after saying this, he came out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no grounds at all for charges in this case. However, you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you on the Passover. Therefore, do you wish that I release to you the King of the Jews?" So they shouted again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel. So Pilate then took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, and put a purple cloak on him. And they repeatedly came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and slapped him in the face again and again. And then Pilate came out again and said to them, "See, I'm bringing him out to you, so that you will know that I find no grounds at all for charges in his case." Jesus then came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man!" So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they shouted, saying, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no grounds for charges in this case." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid, and he entered the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, if it had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews shouted, saying, "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Look at your king." So they shouted, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king except Caesar." So he handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out carrying his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Now Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, "Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews." Therefore many of the Jews read this inscription, because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews. Rather write that he said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part to each soldier, and the tunic also, but the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide whose it shall be." This happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. They divided my garments among them, and they cast lots for my clothing. Therefore the soldiers did these things. Now beside the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own household. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished, in order that the scripture would be fulfilled, said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of sour wine on a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now then, since it was the day of preparation, to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, for that was a high day, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews requested of Pilate that their legs be broken and the bodies be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other who was crucified with him. But after they came to Jesus, when they saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Yet one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may also believe. For these things took place so that the scripture would be fulfilled, "Not a bone of him shall be broken." And again, another scripture says, "They will look at him whom they have pierced." Now after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, requested of Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 liters weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. And now Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my help are the words of my groaning. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Yet you are holy, you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you rescued them. To you they cried out, and they fled to safety. In you they trusted, and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a person, a disgrace of mankind, and despised by the people. All who see me deride me. They sneer, they shake their heads, saying, "Turn him over to the Lord. Let him save him. Let him rescue him, because he delights in him." Yet you are he who brought me forth from the womb. You made me trust when upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon you from birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, for there is no one to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open their mouths wide at me, as a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a piece of pottery, and my tongue clings to my jaws. And you lay me in the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and they cast lots for my clothing. But you, Lord, do not be far away. You, who are my help, hurry to my assistance. Take care.